Hello and welcome back to Giant on Cloud. And what a day to be recording a video for Giant on Cloud today. Yes, you guessed it right, probably from my background. So as India today celebrates 75th Indian Independence Day. So to all the Indian citizens out there celebrating the India's 75th Independence Day, a very, very happy and a warm Independence Day to one and all. So a quick introduction about myself. My name is Jayant. I work as a senior principal engineering technologist at Dell Technologies. And please remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Giant on Cloud. And don't forget to ring that bell to get notifications every time I upload a new video. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about Azure Arc for VMs. So without wasting much time, let's get cracking. Now, during the end of March 2022 is when Microsoft officially announced the public preview of provisioning and managing virtual machines from Azure portal. Yes, you heard it right. So which means you as an Azure portal user or an administrator now have the ability to self-provision a virtual machine onto Azure Stack HCI clusters. So if you look at what is Azure Arc for VMs, right? So Azure Stack HCI version 21H2 and later, 21H2 is the latest one which we have right now. 22H2 is right now in public preview. So with 21H2, now it enables to use the Azure portal to provision and manage on-premises, it could be Windows or Linux virtual machines that can be actually run on Azure Stack HCI clusters. Now, with the help of Azure Arc, now IT administrators now can delegate permissions and roles to application owners and DevOps teams to enable a self-service VM management for their Azure Stack HCI clusters right from an Azure control plane. Isn't this magical? So using the Azure Resource Manager templates, so you can seamlessly use your ARM templates just like you would use to provision an Azure VM. So you can use the same kind of Azure ARM templates to provision a virtual machine onto Azure Stack HCI clusters as well. Now, if you look at some of the, you may be wondering what are some of the benefits of using Azure Arc enabled VMs on Azure Stack HCI. So with Arc for VMs, you should now be able to create a virtual machine right from an Azure control plane. You can start, stop, or restart a virtual machine. And you can also provide control access and add Azure tags, like all the Azure constructs that you normally associate with, that you can associate to the Azure Arc for VMs. You can also add or remove virtual desks and network interfaces, update memory and virtual CPUs for the VM. So there are a lot of good things that are being planned in the future as well. For now, these are the things that you can do for Azure Arc for VMs. All right, so now let's try and understand a little bit about the overall Azure Arc architecture and when it comes to Azure Arc for VMs. So down at the bottom layer, you have the Azure Stack HCI clusters running on 4 nodes. In this case, you can start from a minimum of 1 node and can scale up to all the way up to 16 nodes for an Azure Stack HCI clusters. And then you have the different the VM desks and the network interfaces and different virtual machines like Windows VMs or Linux VMs and so on. And then you also have your VM images that are stored locally that you use for provisioning onto Azure Stack HCI clusters. And you also have the ability to create your virtual networks on Azure Stack HCI clusters as well. Now, using the Arc Resource Bridge, which we're going to talk about what is Arc Resource Bridge in the next slide. Using the Arc Resource Bridge, you actually connect your on-premises Azure Stack HCI clusters to your Azure Arc resources. Okay, so using the Azure Stack HCI resource provider, you should be able to create your virtual machines. You should be able to create your custom location. So custom location is something like like your just like your data center region that you have in Azure today, but you can also create your custom region, which is actually pointing to an Azure Stack HCI clusters that you have deployed on premises. Okay, so which I'm going to show how to create a custom location and so on when I actually do the live demo. And then you can store your VM images and create your own Azure virtual network, which can talk to your VM that you provision onto Azure Stack HCI clusters using an Azure portal. Okay. Now, and then on the left-hand side, you have the normal Azure resources that you can bind together. As you can see, all of these Azure constructs like access and security, which are all pre-built. That's the goodness of ARM, that provides seamless ability to use some of the Azure constructs to a virtual machine that's actually hosted on Azure Stack HCI clusters, like identity access management, securities, the inventory, overall automation, governance using policies, Azure policies, and so on. The beauty is when you deploy an Azure Arc VM, it automatically deploys the Azure Arc agents. So, which means when you actually provision a VM, it's right up there in Azure portal, and it shows up just like any Azure virtual machine. Okay, and then you have, using the Azure, you have the management services, like you can do monitoring, update, backup, and a lot of the good things that you normally associate with an Azure construct, right? So, like I said, IT administrators can actually plan this overall deployment activity, provide the identity access management to the end users who have the right or the rights to go provision Azure Arc for VMs onto Azure Stack HCI clusters. So all that can be done by an IT administrator, so they can give the right privileges for the set of users that are meant to use these services. So what is Azure Arc Resource Bridge? An Azure Arc Resource Bridge right now in public preview, so just keep that in mind. Now it's part of the overall Azure Arc platform, and it's designed to host other Azure Arc services. But in this release, it is specifically focused for that supports VM self-provisioning and management from Azure for the virtualized Windows and Linux VMs hosted on premises on Azure Stack HCI and VMware. Okay, for now it is only focused for HCI clusters and VMware. Keep that in mind. So this resource bridge is nothing but it's a packaged appliance, it's a VM which hosts the management Kubernetes clusters that requires absolutely no management at all. It's a self-managed VM. Okay, and using this appliance, you can basically, this helps in enabling the virtual machine self-service from Azure without having to create and manage Kubernetes clusters. That's one. Secondly, it's completely supported by Microsoft, including updates to the core components and everything. So there is nothing for a user or an IT administrator to go manage and do the lifecycle management of this particular VM appliance designed for Azure Arc Bridge. Okay, Azure Arc Resource Bridge, and it's also designed to recover from catastrophic failures and error conditions and so on. It also supports the deployment to any private cloud hosted on Hyper-V or VMware right from Azure portal. So the demo that I am going to show you is self-provision of virtual machines onto Azure Stack HCI clusters. Okay, so these are some of the these are some of the functionalities of Azure Arc Resource Bridge VM appliance. Now, if you look at the overall architecture, right, the base layer that basically represents the resource bridge and the Arc agents, this particular one, right, and the platform layer also that includes the custom location and the cluster extension. Right, so this is where I spoke about in the previous slide, right? Custom location is when you go and provision your Azure Arc for VMs, it basically asks you, one of the parameters is to provide a custom location, right? So custom location is like your location, just like your Azure data center regions. So that is also one of the regions, but in this case, a custom location, which I'm going to do a demo in this episode, is going to be an Azure Stack HCI cluster. All right, and the solution layer for each service supported by Arc Resource Bridge, which is different for every type of the virtual machine. Okay, so the cluster extensions here is nothing but the Azure service deployed on premises. It's basically the Azure services that is deployed to run on premises. For this release, which is for the preview, it supports basically two services, which is Azure Arc enabled VMware and Azure Arc enabled Azure Stack HCI. Okay, so like we discussed in the beginning, this is only supported for now for for VMware and Azure Stack HCI. Okay, now custom location is like I said, it's a deployment target where you can actually go and create an Azure resource. So it maps to different resources for different Azure services. For example, an Arc enabled VMware, the custom location resource maps to an instance of the vCenter. Okay, a custom location for Azure Stack HCI, it maps to an Azure Stack HCI cluster instance, right? So a custom location is different for different target endpoints. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, all right. So that's an overview of the Arc for VMs and Azure Arc Resource Bridge, because it's very important to understand the overall architecture before we get started with demo of provisioning Azure Arc for VMs on Azure Stack HCI clusters. All right, now let's look at the steps that are involved to deploy Azure Arc Resource Bridge, because that's one of the prerequisites before you can self-provision a virtual machine onto Azure Stack HCI clusters. Okay, now you can do it with either by using Windows Admin Center, or you can use the CLI. Okay, I'm going to be sharing these links in my under the comment section in my video on YouTube. So feel free to grab these links from there. But I'm just going to walk you through what is that you need and what are some of the things that you need to be aware of. Okay, now when you are deploying the Azure Arc Resource Bridge from Windows Admin Center, very important to keep in mind is that so if you've already set up AKS on Azure Stack HCI clusters, you cannot currently deploy Arc Resource Bridge through Windows Admin Center. This is very important to keep in mind. Okay, so in my case, I had to use the CLI, the command line interface, to actually deploy the Arc Resource Bridge, because I had already set up the AKS on Azure Stack HCI. Okay, just to keep that in mind. So if you're using Windows Admin Center, make sure that AKS on Azure Stack HCI is not deployed. If it is, then use the command line interface. All right, so let's look at the steps that are involved, right? So first is setting up the Windows Admin Center. So make sure you have the latest and the greatest of Windows Admin Center. Please remember, this is in public preview. Okay, so you need the version 21.2110.2 or later, and also make sure that all of your installed extensions are updated to the latest and greatest. All right, so the steps involved are basically setting up the Windows Admin Center. In my case, it's already set up. set up the Arc resource bridge and create a custom location. So in my case, I'm going to be using the command line interface and also projecting the network to Azure. So basically, in my case, it involves installing the latest in the PowerShell modules, creating a custom location, and also creating the virtual network and the gallery image so that I can go and provision a VM. All right. Okay. So again, I'm not going to go through each of the steps that are documented in this document. I will let you explore it. It's pretty straightforward. You can take my word. Every step that is documented here absolutely works. I did not have any issues creating an Arc resource bridge using the CLI. All right, now I'm not going to go through every step that is involved to create an Arc VM. It is self-explaining. It's pretty simple. You just go through the wizard, select the right desired inputs like the custom location, the resource bridge, and so on. And that should get you provision the VM. But what I am going to show you, there's already a VM that is provisioned, which is called HCI Arc VM. So let's click on that VM. All right. So as you can see, the icon for this VM is also a little different, right? So this indicates it's an Azure Arc VM. Okay. So you have pretty much all the Azure constructs that are available for this virtual machine, right? You can do the access identity control management. For example, I have logged in as admin at Giant on Cloud. Now let's say if there's one more user called test user 1 at Giant on Cloud. Now that user does not have access to provision an Arc VM onto Azure Stack HCI clusters. Okay, so that's the kind of power you as an IT administrator would get because you can associate these users to Azure AD, right? And you can tie in all those identity access management. And the networking, the disks, you can also add a network interface. You can also add additional disks, just like you would do in case of an Azure VM. All that good stuff can be done, right from an Azure control plane. Not only that, you can stop a VM. It's already started, so you can restart. You can stop the virtual machine. You can do all of that. All the lifecycle management can be done right from an Azure portal. Now, let's see where this VM is actually being, is residing, right? So if I go into Windows Admin Center, as you can see right now under virtual machines, there's a VM that says JY-ARC-VM1, right? And the beauty is when I deploy this Arc VM, it's already Arc enabled VM, right? Which means the Azure Connected Machine agent is already deployed. So I'm going to show you where that is. Okay, let's go into that particular VM. You can use Windows Admin Center to connect to this VM as well, but I'm using Hyper-V to connect. I find it very easy and convenient. So I've right now logged into this VM. So let's go and panel. And let's go to programs and features. All right, and you see this Azure Connected Machine agent. So this is automatically deployed. I didn't have to push this agent manually, right? So this was automatically deployed and it shows up in Azure, right? All right, so with that, I've come to the end of this demo, but I totally encourage you to go and try this out yourself. It is really magical. I just love the way it gives that powerful interface for IT users to self-provision a virtual machine onto Azure Stack HCI clusters. It's simply mind-boggling. So I would encourage you to go and follow this document and deploy it on your own to see how this unfolds. All right, so with that, I have come to the end of this episode. So just to summarize, we looked at the overall architecture for Azure Arc for VMs, how to create an Arc resource bridge, and how to deploy an Azure Arc for VMs onto Azure Stack HCI clusters. I hope you enjoyed this demo. Please leave your valuable feedback and comments under the comment section. In my next episode, let's look at the further possibilities that Azure Arc offers today on Azure Stack HCI. All right, so until then, stay tuned and stay safe.